Have you ever felt like life is throwing everything at you? Like you're in the middle of a storm with no way out? In today's video, I want to share a powerful story from the Bible that can completely change how you face those storms. Stick around, because by the end, you'll understand how to find peace, even when everything around you is chaotic. I want to talk to you about a story in the Bible that I think we can all relate to. It's the story where Jesus calms the storm, and I believe there's something in it that can give you peace, even when everything around you feels chaotic. It's found in Mark chapter 4, verses 35 to 41. Let's break it down, and I'll show you how this story is so much more than just a historical event. It's a lesson for us today. So, picture this. Jesus had been teaching all day. He was exhausted. He and his disciples got into a boat to cross to the other side of the lake. Now, remember, these disciples weren't just random guys. Many of them were fishermen. They knew the water, they knew how to handle a boat, and they definitely weren't scared of a little wind or rain. But something happened that night. As they were sailing, a huge storm came out of nowhere. The wind was howling, the waves were crashing against the boat, and water started filling the boat. It wasn't just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. And where was Jesus? He was asleep in the back of the boat. Imagine that for a second. The storm is raging, the disciples are panicking, and Jesus is peacefully asleep. Doesn't that sound a bit strange? How could he sleep through that? The disciples were terrified. They thought they were going to die. So in their desperation, they woke him up and said, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" Isn't that a question we've all asked at some point in our lives? When we're in the middle of our own storms, it can feel like God is distant, like he's asleep and doesn't care about what's happening to us. Have you ever been there? Have you ever prayed and felt like God wasn't answering or like he was ignoring your situation? The disciples felt that way too. But here's what happened next. Jesus woke up, and instead of joining in their panic, he did something amazing. He stood up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." And immediately the wind died down, and there was complete calm. Let's pause right there. Can you imagine what that must have been like? One moment, the boat is about to sink, the waves are crashing, and the next moment, everything is perfectly still. It's almost like time froze. The disciples were in shock. They had seen Jesus perform miracles before, but this was something different. Even the wind and the waves obeyed him. Then, Jesus turned to them and asked, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" That's a powerful question. And it's the same question he asks us when we're in the middle of our storms. Why are we so afraid? Do we still have no faith? Now, let's bring this home. The storms in your life might not be literal, but they feel just as real, don't they? Maybe it's financial struggles, health problems, issues in your marriage, or something else entirely. Whatever it is, it feels overwhelming. It feels like you're going to sink, and maybe you've even been asking God, "Don't you care? Don't you see what I'm going through?" But here's the thing. Just like in the story, Jesus is in the boat with you. He hasn't left you, he hasn't forgotten you, and he definitely isn't ignoring you. The disciples didn't need to be afraid because Jesus was with them the entire time. And if Jesus is with you, then no matter how bad the storm gets, you're going to make it through. You see, the disciples made the mistake of focusing on the storm instead of focusing on who was in the boat with them. They allowed fear to take over because they forgot that the creator of the universe was right there. The same voice that spoke creation into existence was the same voice that calmed the storm. And that voice is still speaking today. That voice is still powerful enough to calm the storms in your life. But here's an important point. Sometimes Jesus calms the storm around us, and sometimes He calms the storm within us. Sometimes the external circumstances don't change right away, but He gives us peace in the middle of the chaos. That's the real miracle. It's easy to have peace when everything is going well, but true peace, the kind that only Jesus can give, comes when everything is falling apart, yet you can still trust Him. Philippians 4 verse 7 says, "And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." That's the peace we're talking about. The kind that doesn't make sense to the world. The kind that allows you to be calm even when the storm is raging. So how do we find that peace? How do we stop focusing on the storm and start focusing on Jesus? It starts with trust. You see, faith isn't about never being afraid. It's about knowing who to turn to when you are afraid. It's about believing that even though the storm is real, Jesus is more powerful. It's about understanding that He's in control, even when it feels like everything is out of control. I know that's easier said than done. We're human, and it's natural to worry when things go wrong. But that's why we have to remind ourselves daily of who Jesus is. We have to spend time in His Word, get to know His character, and remember all the times He's been faithful in the past. Because when we do that, our faith grows, and we start to trust Him more. The next time you're in a storm, I want you to remember this story. I want you to picture Jesus standing up in your life and saying, "Quiet, be still." And whether He calms the storm around you or calms the storm within you, trust that He's in control. Trust that He cares about what you're going through, and He's not going to let you drown. In fact, sometimes the storm is the very thing that helps us grow in faith. If the disciples had never experienced the storm, they wouldn't have witnessed Jesus' power in that way. They wouldn't have learned to trust Him in the middle of chaos. And the same goes for us. The storms we face often teach us to rely on God in ways we wouldn't otherwise. So, instead of fearing the storm, let it be an opportunity for your faith to grow. Let it be a reminder that you're not alone, and Jesus is right there with you. And when the storm passes, and it will pass, you'll come out stronger, with a deeper trust in the one who has power over the wind and the waves. To wrap this up, I want to leave you with this thought. Storms don't last forever, but God's love and power do. The next time you find yourself in a storm, don't panic. Instead, turn to Jesus, trust in His power, and let His peace calm your heart. He's in the boat with you, and that's all you need to know. If this message spoke to you, I encourage you to share it with someone who might be going through their own storm. Let's remind each other that we're never alone, and no matter how bad the storm gets, Jesus is always in control.